My name is Marguerite Vandal, and I am 36 years old. The last thing I remember clearly is the dashboard clock reading 6:52 p.m. and a woman's voice coming through the car speaker saying, "The results are positive, and we need to talk about next steps before Friday." My husband's phone had auto-connected to the Bluetooth the second he started the engine. He didn't check it. He never checked it. He'd been driving that same car for 4 years, and the phone always connected, and he never once thought about it because he'd never had anything on that phone he needed to hide. Until he did. I watched his face in the passenger side mirror. He went white. Not pale. White. The color left his mouth first, then his cheeks, and his hand came off the wheel toward the screen so fast that he clipped the turn signal stalk with his knuckle, and the blinker started ticking for a turn we weren't making. Tick, 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 he stabbed at the console. The call didn't end. The woman's voice kept going, calm and clinical, saying a name that was not my name and not his name, saying a date, saying the word confirmed. He said, Marguerite. And then the road did something I still can't reconstruct. I woke up in a ditch 4 hours later, 61 minutes after the last text message my husband sent from a phone that was, according to him, destroyed in the accident. My left hand was under my hip. There was rainwater in my shoe. There were headlights on the embankment above me, and none of them were stopping, and the car was gone. Not overturned. Not smoking. Gone. Here's what my husband did not know. 6 weeks before that drive, I had put a dash cam in that car with a continuous cloud upload because I do fleet risk assessment for a commercial logistics insurer, and I do not own a vehicle that isn't recording. He didn't know because he never asked why I'd been in the garage that Sunday. He thought I was organizing paint cans. That camera uploaded everything, including the 11 seconds after the call, which are the only 11 seconds in this entire story that matter. Welcome back to Calm Karma Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you've ever been the reliable one, the one who reads the fine print, the one everyone assumes will absorb the damage quietly, this story is for you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. But let me back up. 11 years, actually. Because you can't understand what happened on that road without understanding what kind of person I was before it and what my husband's family had spent 11 years training me to be. I work in commercial fleet risk. That means when a trucking company or a delivery outfit or a regional bus line wants to insure 400 vehicles, I'm the one who builds the model that says what those vehicles are actually worth in risk terms. I read accident reports for a living. I read them the way other people read the news. I know the difference between a single vehicle runoff road event and a staged one. I know that most people who fake a crash get the physics wrong. I know that in a real loss of control incident, the steering input is chaotic, and in a manufactured one, it's smooth, because a person who is deliberately putting a car somewhere is still, on some level, driving carefully. I know these things the way a baker knows dough. That'll matter later. The other thing you should know about me is that I drink my coffee out of the same dented steel thermos I've had since my first year on the job. Green, scratched, a dent on the left side where it fell off a loading dock in Trois-Rivières in 2016. My husband hated that thermos. He bought me 3 replacements over the years, nice ones, and I used them for exactly as long as politeness required and then went back to the green one. I take my coffee black with 1 sugar and I fill that thermos every morning at 6:15, and I have done it so consistently that my colleagues joke you could set a clock by it. It's a small thing. It's a stupid thing. It's also, as it turns out, the reason I'm alive. I'll get there. I met Desmond Farreau when I was 25 and he was 28, and he was the most charming man I had ever been in a room with. Not slick. Charming in the specific way of a man who remembers your mother's surgery date and asks about it unprompted. He worked in medical device sales, regional territory, lots of driving, lots of dinners. He was very good at it. When he told you something, you believed it. Not because he was lying, but because he had this quality of total present tense sincerity. Whatever he was saying, he meant it while he said it. That's not the same as it being true. It took me 11 years to learn the difference. We married when I was 27. His family absorbed me immediately, and I mean absorbed. His mother, Odile, ran that family like a small municipality. His older brother, Pascal, was the golden one, a contractor with a residential build business, 6 trucks, always one big project away from the big project. His younger sister, Camille, was the fragile one, the one everything got arranged around. And me? I became the one who checks. Odile figured out in about 4 months that I was the person in the family who read documents, not skimmed. Read. She started bringing me things. Insurance renewals. A property tax assessment she thought was wrong. A contract Pascal was about to sign for a subdivision job in St. Anne with a clause that would have made him personally liable for site remediation. I found it on a Tuesday night at her kitchen table, circled it in pencil, and Pascal made $40,000 more on that job than he otherwise would have. He said, "Yeah, I would have caught that." And Odile said the thing she would say to me, in one form or another, probably 400 times over the next decade. "Marguerite, you're the sensible one. That's your gift." Don't make it a burden for the rest of us. Say that out loud and it sounds like a compliment. Hear it 400 times and you'll understand what it actually is. It's a leash. It's a very polite, very warm, very Sunday dinner leash. It means do the work, do it invisibly, and if you ever mention the work, you violated the terms. Your competence is a gift you give us. It is not a claim you get to make. Don't make it a burden for the rest of us. I heard that phrase during the year I did Pascal's books for free after his bookkeeper quit. I heard it when I caught the double billing on Odile's roof replacement. I heard it when Camille's landlord tried to keep her damage deposit and I wrote the letter that got it back with interest. And I heard it, verbatim, from Desmond, 12 days before he put me in that ditch. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to 4 years ago, because that's when the money changed. And money is where every family shows you who it actually is. My father died in the spring of 2022. He was not a wealthy man. He was a heavy equipment mechanic who worked for the same aggregate company for 31 years, and he was careful and careful compounds. He had a pension, a paid-off house in Buckingham, a locked-in retirement account he never touched, and a life insurance policy he'd been paying into since before I was born because his own father had died at 52 and left nothing. He also had, and this is the part that matters, a very specific idea about what he wanted done with all of it. My dad didn't trust institutions, and he didn't trust in-laws, and he especially didn't trust anything with the word family attached to it as a modifier. He'd watched his own siblings tear apart my grandmother's estate over a garage full of tools. So 8 months before he died, when the diagnosis came back and the timeline got short, he called me and said, "Marguerite, I want you to help me do this properly. Not handle it, not take care of it, properly." We sat down with an estate lawyer in Gatineau named Yvette Sorel, and we did it properly. Everything went into a testamentary trust with me as the sole beneficiary, not a joint account, not a transfer to me personally. A trust, with a corporate trustee for the first 3 years, and then me as trustee after that, with a spendthrift clause, and. This is the part my father insisted on, and I remember him insisting on it, sitting in that chair with an oxygen line in his nose. An explicit exclusion of marital property claims to the maximum extent the law allowed. I actually pushed back on that. I said, "Dad, Desmond's not like that." And my father, who had met Desmond maybe 15 times over the years, who had never once said a bad word about him, looked at me and said, "It's not about him. It's about what people become when the money's already in the room." He died in April. The total, after everything settled, after the house sold and the policy paid and the accounts consolidated, was $1.34 million. I told Desmond the number. That was my mistake. Not a moral mistake. You should be able to tell your husband a number. But it was the operational mistake. And I've had 4 years to sit with it. And I want to be honest with you about it because I think a lot of you have made the same one. I told him the number and I did not tell him the structure. He heard $1.34 million. He did not hear irrevocable testamentary trust with an explicit exclusion. He heard money in the room. Here's the part that's hard to admit. For about 18 months, nothing bad happened, and I let myself believe my father had been wrong. Desmond was lovely about it. He was. He said it was my father's money and my father's wishes, and he wanted no part of decisions about it. He said it exactly like that, and he meant it while he said it. We took a trip to Portugal that fall. The only vacation we'd taken in 6 years that wasn't to a wedding, and he paid for it out of his own commissions and made a point of telling me so. And then the medical device industry did what it does, and his territory got restructured, and his base salary got cut by 22%, and his commission structure got rebuilt around a product line that nobody in his region wanted. His income dropped from roughly $180,000 to roughly $94,000 in a single fiscal year. He didn't tell me. I found out in February of 2024 when I was doing our taxes. Now. And I've spent a lot of hours making sure I'm being fair. A man hiding a pay cut from his wife is not a villain. That's shame. That's a guy who built his whole identity on being the provider and couldn't say the sentence out loud. If that were the whole story, we'd all have moved on. But it wasn't shame that made him do the next part. 3 weeks after I found the tax discrepancy, Pascal's construction business started having a very specific kind of problem. Pascal had taken on a 14-unit townhouse development in Val-des-Monts. It was the big one, the one he'd been chasing for 6 years. He'd financed it with a construction loan through a private lender at a rate that made my teeth hurt. 11.9%, interest only, with a hard maturity date. He'd personally guaranteed it. Odile had co-signed against the equity in her house. And then the framing subcontractor walked off in a payment dispute, and the project went 11 weeks behind. And 11 weeks at 11.9% on $2.1 million is a number I could do in my head at a red light. I want you to hold that number because it's the ticking clock in this story, and it never stops ticking, not once, from here to the end. The loan matured on October 3rd. Everything you're about to hear happened in the shadow of October 3rd. In May of 2024, Odile called me and asked me to come over for coffee. Just us. That should have been my first alarm. Odile did not do just us. Odile did family dinners with 11 people and a roast. She had a folder on the table, not a binder, a folder. Manila, soft at the corners, the kind you get free at a bank. Inside were printouts about my father's trust, not the trust documents themselves. She didn't have those, but general articles. What is a testamentary trust? Can a trust be varied? Family maintenance claims in Quebec. Someone had highlighted things in yellow. She poured coffee. I didn't have my thermos with me. I remember that specifically because I remember wishing I did, the way you wish for a familiar object when a room turns strange. And she said, "Marguerite, I want to talk to you about the family's position." The family's position. She laid it out with the total confidence of a woman who has never in her life had a request refused. Pascal's project was going to save all of them. The townhouses would sell. There was equity coming. But the loan matured in the fall, and the lender wanted either a paydown of $400,000 or a full refinance. And no bank would refinance a project 11 weeks behind schedule. So, she wanted me to lend the trust's money to Pascal's company, $400,000. Documented, she said. A real loan, she said. Interest and everything. I asked her what security she was proposing. She looked at me like I'd sworn in church. I said it more plainly. I said, if I lend $400,000 into a project that's already 11 weeks late on a personally guaranteed loan at 11.9%, what is my position if it fails? Am I in second position behind the private lender? Third, behind the trade's liens? Because there are liens, Odile. I looked. There are 4 registered construction liens on that property totaling $186,000. She hadn't known about the liens. Or she had, and she'd decided they weren't the kind of thing a sensible person mentions. And then she said it. She reached across the table and put her hand on my wrist and said, "Marguerite, you're the sensible one. That's your gift. Don't make it a burden for the rest of us." I said no. I said it politely and I said it once, and I did not raise my voice. I said the trust wasn't structured to make unsecured loans to related parties, which was true, and that even if I'd wanted to, the corporate trustee's investment policy wouldn't permit it, which was also true, and would remain true until the trusteeship transferred to me in June of the following year. She smiled and said she understood completely. Here's what I did not understand until much later. She wasn't asking. She was scouting. She was finding out where the wall was and how thick it was, and most importantly, when it came down. June of the following year. When the corporate trustee stepped aside and I became sole trustee of $1.34 million with full discretion. That's the date they built everything around. Not October 3rd. October 3rd was Pascal's deadline. June was mine, and they knew it before I did because I had told Desmond, offhand, in the car, on the way back from a hardware store, sometime in 2023. He'd asked how the trust worked. I'd explained it. He'd said, "That's smart," and changed the subject to whether we needed a new hose. He remembered. He remembered for 2 years. Now let me tell you about the 8 months before the road, because this is where it stops being a family, being greedy, and starts being something with a plan. August 2024. Desmond suggested we redo our wills. Perfectly reasonable. We hadn't updated them since we bought the house. He'd found a notary, he said, one of Pascal's contacts. Good rates. I said I'd rather use Yvette Sorrell, my father's estate lawyer, because she already had all the file history. He said, sure, whatever's easiest. Small moment. Filed it away without knowing I was filing it. October 2024. Desmond took over the household insurance renewals. This was genuinely out of character. I handle insurance. It's literally my profession. It's a running joke. But he said he wanted to take something off my plate, and he'd found a broker, and he was going to bundle the house and the cars and get us a better rate. I said thank you. I meant it. I was tired. I was working 60-hour weeks on a fleet portfolio for a client with 1,100 vehicles. I did not read the renewal. I do fleet risk assessment for a living, and I did not read my own insurance renewal. December 2024. Camille got engaged. The dinner was at Odil's. 19 people. And somewhere between the main course and dessert, Pascal made a toast that included the line, and to Marguerite, who I know is going to come through for this family the way she always does. Everyone raised their glasses. I hadn't agreed to anything. I looked at Desmond across the table, and he was raising his glass with everyone else, and he did not look at me. That's the moment, if you're asking me when I first knew. But that's the moment a cold thing went down the back of my neck and stayed there. February 2025. Desmond started taking longer trips, sales conferences. 2 nights, 3 nights. He'd always traveled, but the pattern shifted. More midweek, more last minute, and he stopped putting them in our shared calendar. When I asked, he said the calendar sync was broken. It wasn't. I checked. I didn't tell him I checked. March 2025. He asked me, casually, on a Sunday, whether the trust had a successor beneficiary. That's a very specific piece of vocabulary for a man who sells orthopedic implants. I said, why? He said, just thinking about estate stuff. If something happened to you, would it go to me or would it go back to your dad's estate? I said, it would follow my will. Which was true. And which was, I understand now, precisely the information he had asked the question to obtain. April 2025. I got a call from a woman at a credit union in Aylmer confirming an appointment for a joint line of credit application. I said I hadn't applied for a line of credit. She said, oh, the application is under Desmond Farreau and Marguerite Vandal, joint, secured against the residence. It's already conditionally approved. We just need your signature and ID, $150,000, against our house. I called Desmond. He said it was a mistake. The broker had submitted the wrong file. He'd been exploring options, but hadn't meant to submit anything. He was sorry. He'd cancel it. And here's the thing. He was so good. He was so immediately, warmly, plausibly apologetic that I believed him for about 9 hours. Then at 11 that night, I lay in bed next to him and did the arithmetic I do for a living. $150,000 line of credit, $400,000 requested from the trust, $2.1 million loan maturing October 3rd, 4 registered liens, 11 weeks behind. The numbers didn't close. Even with my $400,000 and his $150,000, Pascal's project didn't close. It was $2.1 million of debt against a partially built development in a soft market, which meant either they were bad at math or the $400,000 wasn't the ask. The $1.34 million was the ask. Stay with me here, because this is where I stopped being a wife who was worried and started being a risk analyst who was building a file. And if you're finding this useful, if you've ever had that 11 p.m. arithmetic moment, subscribe. Because what I did over the next 90 days is the part people write to me about. I started a file on May 2nd, 2025, not a binder. A cloud folder with 2-factor authentication mirrored to an encrypted drive in my desk at work. Because the one thing I know about evidence is that it has to exist somewhere the other party can't reach. Item 1, the credit union application. I called the credit union back and requested a copy of the application under my own name since I was a listed applicant. They emailed it in 4 days. And when it arrived, I saw 2 things. The signature on the applicant line was mine. It was not my signature. It was a very good imitation of my signature. The loop on the M, the flat tail on the L, but the pressure was wrong and the pen lift after the V was in a place my hand doesn't lift. and the income declaration listed my annual salary as $167,000. I make $141,000. He'd inflated it to get the ratio to work. That's not a mistake. Nobody submits the wrong file with a forged signature and a fabricated income figure. That's an application someone built. Item 2, I pulled our credit reports, both bureaus. Mine had 4 inquiries in the previous 6 months that I had not authorized. 2 banks, the credit union, and 1 auto lender. An auto lender. Item 3, and this is the one that changed the temperature of everything. I finally read the insurance renewal Desmond had handled in October. Sat down at my kitchen table with the green thermos beside me, black coffee, 1 sugar, and read 41 pages of policy documents the way I read them for clients. He had changed 3 things. He'd increased the liability limits, which is fine and normal. He'd added a rider for loss of use, which is also fine. And he had increased the accidental death and dismemberment coverage on the auto policy from the default $10,000 to $500,000 on both named drivers. Now, I want to be precise because precision is the whole point of me. An AD and D rider on an auto policy is not exotic. Brokers upsell them constantly. A guy could add one for entirely innocent reasons. But $500,000 is not a broker upsell. $500,000 on an auto AD and D rider is a number you go looking for, and the effective date was October 14th, 2024. 4 days after Odile's folder conversation had failed. I sat at that table until the coffee went cold, which it does not usually do, because I usually drink it. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Yvette Sorel, my father's estate lawyer. I asked her one question. If I died and my will left everything to my husband, would the trust assets flow to him? She said, under your current will, yes. The trust terminates in your favor and the residue follows your testamentary instructions. I said, how long does it take to change a will? She said, about 40 minutes, if you know what you want. The second call was to a forensic document examiner in Ottawa named Grieve. I sent him the credit union application and 3 exemplars of my actual signature, and he sent back a 9-page report 11 days later, concluding, in the careful language those people use, that the questioned signature displayed significant divergence in line quality, pen lift location, and terminal stroke pressure, and was probably not written by the same hand. Probably not. That's as strong as they go without a court order for more exemplars. It was enough. The third call was the hardest one, and I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot for 20 minutes before I made it. I called an investigator named Simone Aubet, who does insurance fraud work. I'd used her firm professionally twice, and I hired her personally, out of my own checking account, not the trust, because I wanted no argument later about whose money did what. I told her I wanted to know where my husband went on his trips. She said, do you want to know, or do you want to be able to prove it? I said, prove it. She said, those are different budgets. I said, prove it. Simone came back in 6 weeks with a report I have read probably 40 times and can still recite parts of. Desmond's midweek trips in the previous 4 months, 11 total. Of those, 4 corresponded to actual company events. 7 did not. Of the 7, 5 terminated at the same address in Canada, a townhouse. Registered owner, a numbered company. Sole director of the numbered company, Pascal Farreau. His brother owned it. The occupant was a woman named Rosalie Denal, 34, who worked as a patient coordinator at a private diagnostic clinic. The 2 remaining trips terminated at a hotel in Kingston on dates that corresponded exactly to 2 of the 4 unauthorized credit inquiries. And there was a photograph. Simone had one photograph, taken from a public street at 7:40 in the morning, of Desmond and Rosalie Denal standing on that townhouse porch, and Rosalie Denal was visibly, unambiguously pregnant. Here's the part that's hard to admit. I felt relief, not about the affair. The affair was a knife, and it went in exactly as deep as you'd expect. But I felt relief because for 4 months, I had been carrying a suspicion that made me feel insane, the kind where you start wondering if you're the problem, if you've become a paranoid person who reads conspiracy into an insurance renewal. I wasn't insane. I was right. And being right is a very cold place to stand, but it's solid ground. Now here's the timeline that made my hands shake, and I want to lay it out the way I'd lay it out for a client. Rosalie Denal was, based on Simone's estimate from that photograph and a subsequent one, roughly 6 months pregnant in early June 2025. That puts conception around December 2024. The AD&D rider was added October 14th, 2024. The credit union application with my forged signature was submitted April 8th, 2025. Pascal's construction loan matured October 3rd, 2025. And the corporate trusteeship terminated June 30th, 2025, after which I would be sole trustee of $1.34 million with full discretion. And after which, if I died, that money would move fast and clean into my husband's hands. They weren't building toward October 3rd with my cooperation. They were building toward it without me, 2 weeks before. Let me tell you about the 2 weeks before, because the 2 weeks before are the part that still gets me at 3 in the morning. I did not confront him. I want to be honest that this was partly cowardice and partly strategy, and I've never been able to fully separate the two. But the strategic part was real. Because here is what I understood. A man who has forged your signature and quintupled your death benefit is a man who has already decided what you are worth to him in 2 states, alive and not. If I confronted him, I would be telling him the clock was running. So I did the opposite. I got quieter. I got busier at work. I let him think he had room. And I did 4 things. 1. On June 12th, I met Yvette Sorel and executed a new will. Everything to my father's cousin's daughter in Sherbrooke, a woman named Anna S., whom I like enormously and see twice a year, plus a substantial gift to a scholarship fund at my father's old trade school. Desmond received a specific bequest of $1, which Yvette advised against and which I insisted on, because a $1 bequest is very hard to argue was an oversight. 2. On June 30th, the day I became sole trustee, I did not touch a dollar. I did the opposite. I executed a deed of trust variation that Yvette had drafted, adding an irrevocable co-trustee. Yvette's firm, with a requirement of dual signature for any distribution over $5,000. I gave away my own control, deliberately, because control that can be coerced out of you at 3 in the morning isn't protection. Control that physically requires a second person in an office in Gatineau on a Tuesday is protection. 3. I filed a report, not a police report. Not yet. I filed a written notification with the insurer regarding the AD&D rider and the circumstances of its placement, and I filed a complaint with the credit union's fraud department regarding the forged application, and I filed a copy of Greaves' document examination report with both. Both of those filings generated file numbers. Both of those file numbers were, from the moment they were issued, permanent, dated, third-party records that existed outside my house, outside my marriage, and outside anything Desmond could reach. That's the whole trick, if you want to know it. That's the entire mechanism of everything I've ever done that worked. Get it into a system. Once a fact is inside an institution with a date stamp on it, it stops being your word against his. 4. On July 2nd, I bought a dashcam, a good one. Dual-facing, road and cabin, with continuous cellular upload to a cloud account registered to my work email with 2-factor authentication tied to my phone. I installed it myself on a Sunday afternoon in the garage, tucked behind the mirror housing where you'd have to know to look. Desmond came out at one point and asked what I was doing. I said, "Organizing paint cans," he said, "Huh," and went back inside. Now. 12 days before the road, Odile called a family dinner. It was a Sunday. Roast chicken. 14 people. Camille's fiancé, Pascal's wife, the kids, a neighbor couple who came to those things sometimes. And after dessert, Pascal stood up and gave a speech about the townhouse project. How close it was. How it was going to change things for all of them. How the last stretch was always the hardest. And then he said, "And we've got a bridge plan." I put down my fork. He said the family was going to do a collective bridge. Everyone contributing what they could to get past the October maturity so the units could finish and sell in spring. Odile was putting in $60,000 from a line of credit. Camille was deferring her wedding and putting in $12,000. Pascal's wife's parents were in for $40,000. Then Pascal looked at me in front of 14 people and said, "And Marguerite's in for 400,000. Announced, not asked. The table went quiet in the particular way tables go quiet when everyone already knows and only one person doesn't. I said, "I'm sorry. I'm in for what?" And Desmond, sitting 3 chairs down from me, said, "We talked about this, Mar." We had not talked about that. We had never talked about that. And I looked at him and I understood with total clarity that the plan was not to convince me. The plan was to create a room in which refusing would be so socially catastrophic that I'd agree just to end the moment and then be held to it afterward because I'd said it in front of witnesses. They'd built a room. I've been in a lot of negotiation rooms. I know what a squeeze feels like. I said, I'm not able to do that, Odile said. Marguerite, I said, the trust requires dual trustee signature for distributions over $5,000. I can't unilaterally move $400,000. It's not a matter of willingness. Odile's face did something I'd never seen it do. It emptied. She said, Since when? I said, June 30th. And Pascal said, quietly, to Desmond, but not quietly enough, you said she was sole trustee. 14 people at that table. 12 of them heard nothing. 2 of them, Camille's fiancé, who I barely knew, and the neighbor, a retired school principal named Lucien Marchand, both looked up. Remember Lucien Marchand. He matters at the end. Odile recovered fast. She stood up, put her hand on my shoulder, and said, warmly, for the whole table, Marguerite, you're the sensible one. That's your gift. Don't make it a burden for the rest of us. 3rd time in this story. Hundreds in my life. I said, Odile, I'd like to help. I can't. And that, as far as I can reconstruct, is the night they moved to the other plan. 12 days. 12 days from that dinner to the ditch. Let me take you into the car. It was a Thursday, the 24th of July. Desmond suggested we drive out to a garden center near Wakefield that we'd been to twice. He wanted cedars for the side fence, he said, and they had good stock, and it was a nice drive. I said yes. I want to tell you I had a feeling. I didn't. I had a low, constant background hum of wrongness that I'd been living inside for 4 months, and it did not spike that afternoon. I filled the green thermos at 6:15 that morning like always, and I had it with me in the car, half full, wedged in the cup holder, because I do not go anywhere without it. We took the 105 north. 2 lanes, no shoulder to speak of, a rock face on the right and a drop on the left down to a drainage cut. I've driven that road 100 times. Everybody around here has. He drove. At 6:52 p.m., his phone connected to the Bluetooth. He hadn't ended a call. That's the thing people don't understand about how this happened. He'd been on a call before we left, on his handset, and he'd put the phone in his jacket pocket without hanging up. And when he started the engine, the car did what it had done 10,000 times and grabbed the audio. And Rosalie Denal's voice came out of 6 speakers. The results are positive, and we need to talk about next steps before Friday. Desmond, are you there? The amnio came back clear, but the clinic needs the second payment by the 3rd, or they're releasing the appointment. Desmond? I did not say anything. I want you to understand that. I said nothing. I did not grab the wheel. I have watched the footage. I have watched it more times than is healthy. And in the 11 seconds between her voice starting and the car leaving the road, I say nothing at all. I turn my head toward him. That's it. He went white. He reached for the console. He clipped the signal stalk. Tick, 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 he said, Marguerite. And then the steering wheel went right and then left, and the car went off the left side of the road, down the drainage cut, and rolled once onto its roof. Here's what the footage shows. Both hands on the wheel. Right, then left. Smooth. Not a correction. Not the shudder and overcorrect of a man who's startled. 2 clean inputs, one after the other, with a 1/4-second pause between them. And no brake. The road camera shows no brake lights on the reflective sign we passed at the moment of departure. His foot never went for the pedal. I've read 400 accident reports. I have never once seen a genuine loss of control event where the driver doesn't brake. The car went over. I remember the sound more than the motion, a sort of enormous flat bang, and then gravel, and then quiet. And then I don't remember anything for 4 hours. Here's what happened during those 4 hours, reconstructed later from records, and I want to give it to you the way I got it, because the sequence is the entire case. 7:04 p.m. Desmond texts Pascal, it's done. Bring the truck. Recovered from Pascal's phone. 7:31 p.m. A tow truck registered to Pascal Farreau's company logs a GPS ping at the pull-off 400 meters north of the site. 8:15 p.m. The vehicle is winched out of the ditch, righted, and removed. This is not speculation. There is a photograph, because the tow truck's own forward-facing camera. Standard on commercial recovery vehicles, mandated by their insurer, which is a thing I know because I write those policies, recorded the entire recovery. The vehicle was removed. I was not. That's the one I still have trouble saying at a normal speed. My husband got the car out of that ditch and left me in it. Not because he checked and thought I was dead. The cabin camera shows him leaning in at 7:02 and looking directly at me, and I am moving. My left hand is moving. He looked at me. He saw me move. And then he got a tow truck. 11:47 p.m. driver named Fatima Oyalaran, 22. A nursing student heading home from a shift in Maniwaki stopped because she saw a reflection off something metal in the drainage cut. It was my thermos. It had been thrown clear when the car rolled, and it was sitting on the gravel 11 feet from me, dented side up, catching her headlights. Green, scratched. Trois Rivières, 2016. My husband bought me 3 better ones. Fatima called 911 at 11:49. I was in Gatineau by 12:40 with a fractured left radius, 4 broken ribs, a grade 3 concussion, and hypothermia in July because I'd been lying in 8 centimeters of standing water for 4 hours. I woke up at 6:20 the next morning. Desmond was there. He was sitting in the chair by the window in the same shirt, unshaven, eyes red, and when I opened my eyes, he made a sound I have never heard a man make and grabbed my hand and said, "Oh God, Marguerite." He told me the story he'd built. A deer. There'd been a deer. He'd swerved. He'd been thrown from the vehicle. His door had come open, and he'd hit his head and he'd woken up in the trees maybe 100 meters away, disoriented. And it was dark and he couldn't find the car. And he'd walked in the wrong direction for what felt like an hour and finally flagged someone on the road who drove him to a gas station, and he'd called Pascal. And by the time they got back and found the site, the ambulance was already there. His phone had been destroyed in the crash. That's why he hadn't called. He cried. He was. And I say this with a strange kind of professional admiration. Extraordinary. Because he wasn't performing grief. He was performing a specific, complicated cocktail of guilt and terror and relief that would have been almost impossible to fake. And I genuinely think, that at least 40% of it was real. I think he had spent 4 hours in a state of total horror at himself, and that horror was authentic, and it sat in the same body as a man who had told his brother to bring the truck. Both things. I let him tell me the whole story. I said, "Okay," I said, "I'm so glad you're all right." And I lay there in a hospital bed with a fractured arm and a head that felt like a struck bell, and I thought about one thing, and one thing only. The dashcam uploads over cellular, which meant it had uploaded before the car was moved, which meant that whatever Pascal had done with that vehicle, and I assumed by then it was compacted, because that's what I would have done, did not matter at all. Stay with me, because everything from here forward is procedure, and procedure is where I live. Subscribe if you want to see how a person with no leverage and 1 broken arm takes 11 seconds of video and turns it into the end of an entire family's plan. I did not access the footage from the hospital. I want to explain why, because it's the single most important decision I made. I was concussed. My judgment was impaired, and I knew it was impaired. And the one thing you cannot do with evidence is handle it badly while your brain is swollen. So on day 2, I asked a nurse for a phone, and I called Yvette Sorel, and I said one sentence: "I need you to send someone to my work desk." Yvette sent a paralegal to my office with a signed authorization. My director, who had known me for 9 years and who had never once seen me miss a 6:15 coffee, let her in. The paralegal took the encrypted drive and the cloud credentials, sealed, logged, chain of custody documented, because Yvette does estate work, but Yvette's partner does litigation, and litigation people are born knowing about chain of custody. The footage was downloaded in a law office in Gatineau on July 27th at 2:15 p.m. in the presence of 2 lawyers and a notary who signed an attestation. Then Yvette called me. She said, "Marguerite, I need you to understand what's on this." I said, "I was there." She said, "You were unconscious for most of it." She was right. I'd only seen 11 seconds. The camera had recorded 4 hours and 9 minutes because it runs on impact detection and it does not stop. It recorded the tow truck. It recorded Pascal's voice saying, "Is she?" And Desmond's voice saying, "Just get it on the deck." It recorded them discussing where to take the vehicle. It recorded a 40-second conversation in which Pascal said the word crusher and Desmond said, not local, Pascal, Jesus." And it recorded at 8:09 p.m. Desmond leaning back into the cabin one last time, 30 centimeters from a camera he did not know existed, and saying, to me, to a woman he could see was breathing, "I'm sorry. I really am." And then leaving. Yvette said, "This is not an insurance matter." I said, "I know." She said, "Do you want me to call them or do you want to?" I said, "Call them. Now." Here's where I have to slow down because people always want the confrontation to be a room. They want me to walk into Odell's dining room and put a folder on the table and say something devastating. That's not what happened. And I want to tell you why, because I think it's the most useful thing in this entire story. I never confronted Desmond. Not once. Not ever. To this day, I have not had a single conversation with my husband about what he did, because a confrontation is a conversation, and a conversation gives the other person a turn. And Desmond Farreau has never in his life been given a turn he couldn't win. He would have cried. He would have been sincere. He would have explained. And some part of me, the part that married him, the part that is still, somewhere, 25 years old and being charmed, would have listened. So I didn't give him a turn. I gave him a process. On July 28th at 9 a.m., 3 things happened simultaneously, and they happened simultaneously on purpose, because I sequenced them from a hospital bed with a legal pad and a bad arm. 9 a.m. exactly. First, Yvette's litigation partner delivered the footage, the grieve report, the credit union file, Simone Abbott's investigation report, and a 22-page chronology to the Sûreté du Québec detachment handling the collision file, which, at that point, was an open single-vehicle investigation with an unexplained absence of the vehicle. Second, my insurer received a formal notification of suspected fraud regarding the AD&D rider with the placement date, the beneficiary, the underwriting file, and a copy of the footage. Insurers have a specific machine for this, and it is fast and it is merciless. Third, Yvette sent a single email to Desmond Farreau, copied to no one, containing no accusations, no anger, and no explanation. It contained a notice of separation, a notice that the matrimonial home was subject to a preservation order application, and a demand for return of the vehicle for inspection pursuant to a preservation of evidence motion filed that morning at the Gatineau courthouse, file number attached. That's it. That was the whole confrontation, a file number. Desmond called me 11 times that day. I did not answer. He called 43 times over the next week. I did not answer. He came to the hospital, and my nurse, a woman named Bettina, who had read the situation without being told a single thing, informed him that visitor access had been restricted at the patient's request, and would he please not return. He wrote me a 6-page letter. I read it. I read all of it, once, and then I gave it to Yvette because a 6-page letter from a man in his position is a document and documents go in the file. He never mentioned the tow truck. 6 pages. He mentioned the deer twice. Now let me tell you how it fell apart, because it did not fall apart the way people expect. It didn't explode. It came apart in the boring, grinding, sequential way that real institutional consequences always arrive, which is to say slowly, and then all at once, and never at a dinner table. August 6th. The SQ located the vehicle, not at a crusher. Pascal had been too cheap to send it out of province and too scared to send it locally, so it was sitting under a tarp behind a storage yard in Luskville, and it had been sitting there for 13 days with the driver's door intact and closed. Desmond's story was that his door had come open and he'd been thrown from the vehicle. The door was closed. The latch was undamaged. The seatbelt on the driver's side was retracted and locked in the retracted position, which is a thing that does not happen if you are thrown out of a rolling car. August 14th. The insurer denied the AD&D claim, which nobody had filed because I hadn't died, but insurers investigate placement patterns anyway, and referred the file to the Insurance Bureau's investigative unit. That referral triggered an automatic review of every policy in the household, including Pascal's commercial fleet policy, because the tow truck involved in an evidence removal was on it. That's the thing about touching an institution. You don't get to touch one part of it. August 21st. Pascal's tow truck was suspended from the recovery rotation list, which is the list that provides roughly 60% of a small recovery operations revenue. August 29th. Pascal's construction lender, which had been nervously watching an 11-week delay, received notice through completely ordinary channels, because commercial lenders monitor litigation registries, that its personal guarantor was the subject of a criminal investigation. The lender did not wait for October 3rd. They called the loan on September 4th, 29 days early, citing a material adverse change clause that was in the agreement the whole time, in the section I had once, 4 years earlier, offered to read for Pascal, and that Pascal had told me he'd already looked at. He hadn't. September 9th. Odile's house, which secured her co-signature, entered the process. She had put a home she'd lived in for 34 years behind her son's development because she was certain, absolutely certain, that the sensible one would come through in the end. September 22nd. Desmond was charged. I'm not going to list the counts because the file is what the file is and it's public and some of it is still before the court and I have been told, correctly, to be careful. But criminal negligence is in there. So is fraud. So is forgery from a credit union application submitted on April 8th that I had already, months earlier, made into a numbered complaint. That's the whole trick again. It was already in a system. October 3rd came and went. Pascal's townhouse project sat unfinished, 14 units, framing complete on 11 of them, and I drove past it once in November because I wanted to see it, which was not a healthy impulse, and I did it anyway. Now, the part where it failed in front of witnesses. Because it did, and it wasn't in a courtroom. Camille got married on the 11th of October. They'd already booked it. You can't unbook a wedding, and the deposits were gone, and Camille, who I want to be clear was not part of any of this and who I have always liked, went ahead with it. I was not invited, obviously. But Lucien Marchand was, the retired school principal. The neighbor who'd looked up at that dinner in July when Pascal said, "You said she was sole trustee." Lucien had, in August, been contacted by an SQ investigator because Simone Abbott's chronology listed everyone present at the July 12th dinner, and investigators call witnesses. And at Camille's wedding, at a table of 9 people, Odile stood up during the reception and gave a speech about family, about how family absorbs shocks, about how in every generation there's someone who tries to take from the family instead of giving, and how you find out who people really are when the pressure comes, and how she was so proud of her children for standing together. She was talking about me. Everyone in that room knew she was talking about me. And Lucien Marchand, 73 years old, 38 years as a school principal, stood up at his table and said, at completely normal volume, "Odile, I gave a statement to the police in August. They asked me about the dinner in July. I told them what your son said about the trusteeship. I'd rather you knew that from me than from a subpoena." And he sat down. I wasn't there. I've had it described to me by 3 people, and the descriptions differ on details, but not on the silence. Odile did not finish her speech. Here's the aftermath, compressed, the way these things actually go. Odile's house sold under power of sale in February 2026 for $71,000 less than the appraisal, which is what happens in a forced sale in a bad month. She lives in an apartment in Hull now. Camille helps her. Pascal filed a proposal to creditors in March. His 6 trucks became 2. The numbered company that owned the townhouse in Canada was part of the estate, and the townhouse was sold, and Rosalie Denal, who had a baby boy in September, had to move. Desmond's employment ended in October when the charges became a matter of public record, because medical device sales is a licensed facility business, and hospitals do not issue site credentials to people with pending fraud charges. He is living with a friend in Ottawa. He has, I'm told, been genuinely, visibly, publicly wrecked. I believe that. I've never doubted it for a second. That's what made him so effective. The trust is intact. All $1.34 million of it, plus growth, still under dual signature, still requiring Yvette's firm and me to both sign for anything over $5,000. I have never taken a distribution larger than what my father would have called a sensible one. The scholarship fund at his old trade school is set up, 2 apprentices a year. I sign those in the same office, with the same second signature, and it takes 40 minutes and a notary, and I would not have it any other way. My arm healed crooked in a way that aches when the pressure drops. I still fill the green thermos at 6:15. Now, reconciliation. Because they did try. Of course they did. In January, Camille called me. Not Odile. Not Pascal. Camille, who was 7 months pregnant herself by then, and who cried on the phone for a while before she could say anything, and who eventually said, "I didn't know. I swear to God, Marguerite, I didn't know." I believed her. I still believe her. She asked if I would come to Odile's for Easter. I said no. Then I said something else, and I thought about it carefully, because I knew this call was coming and I had decided in advance exactly what I would and would not do. I said, I will have a relationship with you, Camille. Just you. Not the family. Not the group. You and me on the phone, at a restaurant, one at a time. I will not attend anything with more than 3 people at it. I will not be in a room your mother is also in. And if you ever, once, carry a message from her to me, that ends and it doesn't come back. She said that was unfair to Odile. I said, it might be. Those are the terms, not let me think about it. Not maybe someday. Terms. She took them. She's taken them for 6 months now. We had lunch 3 weeks ago. She brought the baby. I held him for 40 minutes and he slept the whole time, and it was, honestly, the best 40 minutes I've had all year. Odile has written to me twice. Both letters went to Yvette, unopened, and into the file, because everything goes into the file. That's not spite. That's just what I do now. It's what I've always done. The difference is that I used to do it for them. Here's what I learned. They never wanted my competence. They wanted my compliance, and they had learned that if you call compliance a gift, a certain kind of woman will hand it over her whole life and thank you for noticing. You're the sensible one. That's your gift. Don't make it a burden for the rest of us. Listen to that sentence again. It's not praise. It's a job description with a gag order attached. It says, be capable, silently, in our service, forever. And the day you use that capability for yourself, you've become the problem. I was the sensible one for 11 years. And the entire time, every skill I built reading contracts and accident reports and insurance riders, every single one of those skills, I used on their behalf, on Pascal's subdivision contract, on Odile's roofer, on Camille's landlord. I never once used them on my own house, until the night I lay in bed and did the arithmetic and the numbers didn't close. Here's the thing about paperwork that nobody tells you. Paperwork doesn't love you. It doesn't care about your history or your loyalty or the 11 years you spent at somebody's table. It is completely, beautifully indifferent. A file number does not remember that you used to be family. A dual signature requirement does not soften at 3 in the morning when somebody who knows exactly how to talk to you is crying. That's not coldness. That's the only kind of protection that works on people who are very good at being warm. If someone in your life has ever announced your contribution before asking for it, if you've ever sat at a table where the number was already decided and your only job was to say yes, that's the room. That's the whole room. It doesn't matter how nice the chicken is. And if you take one thing from me, take this. Put it in a system, whatever it is. The complaint, the report, the file, the second signature, the camera you install on a Sunday and tell no one about. Get it out of your head and out of your house and into something with a date stamp, because the moment a fact lives inside an institution, it stops being a thing they can talk you out of. I didn't beat them because I was angry. I beat them because on July 2nd, I bought a camera. And on June 30th, I gave away half my own control. And on May 2nd, I opened a folder. None of those were revenge. Every one of them was Tuesday. I want to know what you think. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever been the sensible one? Have you ever had your generosity announced for you at a table full of people? What did you do? I read every single comment, and I mean that. And if this story got to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that walking away quietly is not the same as losing. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There's always a next one. I'll see you then.